Don't you just love the very obvious shilling, grifting, and hypocrisy? Let me explain something to you, my friends. In 2020, I was not supporting Donald Trump until the end of the year. I looked at his second term agenda and decided to say, okay, I'm going to support this. It'd be hypocritical of me, with all the things I've stood for and believe in, to say that this is a bad administration. His efforts in peace were largely good. And so when Donald Trump lost in 2020, what did I say? I said Donald Trump lost. I didn't say it was rigged. I didn't say it was stolen. I said the enthusiasm against Donald Trump was greater than the enthusiasm for him. Gallup's polling predicted this would happen if you were paying attention. The American people saw COVID as the most pressing issue, and they thought the Democrats would do a better job. They wanted to change. Now, I have questions about 2020, certainly. But when Joe Biden got 81 million votes, ballot harvesting plays a big role. Didn't see that one coming. Trump did make massive gains in support. Saw that one coming. Didn't see that Biden would do better. What was my response? Was my response, I was a Democrat the whole time and Trump's done such a bad job on everything? No. My position I maintained because the logic was true and correct. To all the libertarians out there, let me throw you some shade first. I know I love the libertarians, but they were blaming Donald Trump for Operation Warp Speed. I had disagreed with Thomas Massie on spending. I know, more liberal guy. Many libertarians were saying Donald Trump is the one who got behind Warp Speed, initiated the lockdowns, and it resulted in all of these problems. And I said, hindsight is 2020. When this was dropping and we saw videos out of China, people collapsing, we didn't know exactly what to do. I look at that and say, I don't know what to tell you, man. I don't know that I could do a better job than Trump, and I see no reason to assume that any Democrat would do a better job. So I don't blame Trump for Operation Warp Speed. And that is the libertarian criticism. Liberals made up a whole bunch of garbage, like Trump said, inject bleach or something. Look, Trump made a passing remark about UV light disinfectants. And he said, is it possible that there is some kind of disinfectant or something we could inject or put in the lungs? I don't know. Okay, you could argue, well, it's a question, I guess. And in fact, disinfectant is probably the wrong word for an injection, but Trump didn't tell people to do anything. And in fact, there is UV light therapy for the lungs that can kill pathogens. But I digress. Look, man, I just said, look, I don't think Trump is wrong. I stand by my decision. I don't care if 81 million people voted for Donald Trump, for Joe Biden. I don't care if you think the election was stolen. I think people didn't like Trump. I think Trump was the right choice. Today, my friends, Jon Stewart, Micah Brzezinski, Bill Maher, so many lining up to suckle the teat of government now that they realized they're the losers. So I can give respect to a certain degree to many of these Democrats who are like, no, we can't give up. Wokeness is not the problem. Here's an article for you from The Nation. The left didn't sink Kamala Harris. Here's what did. Jon Stewart says presidential election was a repudiation of liberal government he spent years propping up. Indeed, an overly regulated system that is no longer responsive or delivering for the needs of the people. I love this, too. Honorable mention to our friend Ezra Klein, who only after the election comes out and says, stop saying that crime, immigration, and high prices are just Fox News. Go talk to people. I live in New York City. I ask people, and they're pissed. Yeah, Ezra, where were you before the election? When you thought you were the moral majority, y'all danced around claiming that you were right. Now, I'll give Jon Stewart a little bit of credit. For one, he'll always get credit from me for his staunch advocacy for 9/11 first responders, survivors, and those who are suffering for the work they did. Mad respect, John. I mean it sincerely. I truly respect the work you've done in this regard. However, Jon Stewart will get a little bit more because he did push back on, say, like the COVID origins. The Wuhan lab seemed to make the most sense. And even then, I'll tell you, my position was, seems likely, but we really don't know. I mean, it's possible. I'm a fairly, if I don't have the hard evidence, I don't claim to know things. If I see evidence, I'll say it. Just the other day, I was wrong about Marcus Aurelius, and I said, well, I read something wrong on the internet. Surprise, these things happen. Jon Stewart has now come out saying that the election is a repudiation of government. Shocker.
The election that we just had was a repudiation of the status quo. an overly regulated system that is no longer responsive or delivering for the needs of the people.
Where were you before the election? You know what, man? It gets me steamed. I will accept Jon Stewart's support right now because I predicted this. Should we win the popular vote and win, these people, the default libs, who only say what they think the majority wants to hear, will line up behind us. Fine. We need their weight. It's better it's on our side, but they are still despicable people who will flip their morals on a dime.
Or their beloved behatted squirrels. Oh, R.I.P. Peanut. Government is theoretically a constitutional system of checks and balances between equally powerful branches. But what government actually is an overly complicated Byzantine bureaucratic maze of rules, loopholes to those rules, and norms.
And now what we're seeing from our good friend, Jon Stewart, wrong one, is making fun of the liberals who are doing the same thing that he's doing. So, again, I will say this. You know, I've been a fan of Jon Stewart for a long time, and I can respect that, he called out COVID. I mentioned these things. But it's fascinating to me to see the likes of Bill Maher criticizing The View. Yeah. You know, we're not going to forget it. Like I said, credit to Jon Stewart when he called out the COVID origins. But we're not going to forget, John, when you made your weird white privilege show on Apple TV, when you tried to bend the knee, you could have said no. We're not going to forget Bill Maher laughing, saying Kamala Harris is going to win the popular vote. Trump can't win. And then now going, you know, I cared about the environment, but it's Democrats' fault that I lost. Uh-huh. My friends, Ezra, y'all could have said each and every one of these points the day before the election, at least. Here, let's listen to Jon Stewart on this one. This one is Jon Stewart performs one-act play about Morning Joe co-hosts visiting Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago.
Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. And for those asking why we would go speak to the president-elect during such fraught times, especially between us, I guess I would ask back, why wouldn't we?
Because you said he was Hitler. I'm going to do a one-act play called Joe and Mika Go to Mar-a-Lago. Mr. President, your rhetoric is outrageous. I cannot in good conscience... Ooh, are those macaroons? The pink one is raspberry.
Yes. Ha 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 ha, Jon Stewart. I love this. Jon Stewart making fun of Joe and Micah for bending the knee to Donald Trump. And I'm just like, John, you're doing the same thing. You propped up all these arguments. In fact, I can't blame John necessarily, but he created the show, his producers, that created this sycophantic machine of faux comedy like John Oliver. And the dude just lies all the time. Now, John's better than a lot. I'll give it to him. Bill Maher has criticized wokeness for several years, but these guys had nothing to say good about Donald Trump. And to make fun of Joe and Micah for doing the same thing you're doing is just so, well, I'll just call it enjoyable, I guess. Here we go. Leftist viewers deal MSNBC and CNN a Trump slump ratings crash. Indeed, we saw it. Indeed, we did. Here we go. MSNBC contributor fuels Morning Joe boycott after Trump meeting. They don't appreciate their audience. Heavens me, did you see their audience? We talked about it yesterday. What did they get? In the Morning Joe key demo, 28,000. That's funny, isn't it? There's a boycott. Does anybody know? Because ain't nobody watches this trash. The market works great. You can stop watching Morning Joe anytime, Jennifer Rubin told her social media followers. Oh, poor Joe and Micah. They are no longer relevant. They speak to no one. They have, I was saying this the other day on IRL. There's something particularly brutal about, and I've done this before, so I know, first experience. Talking to a camera to produce content you know that no one is going to watch. So in my career, I've largely done a a lot of shows where the viewership doesn't really matter. If 3 people are watching, you're having a conversation with some friends. You do this. But I have done contracted stuff where the show says, like, we don't know what the viewership's going to be. I've done on-camera TV hits, they call it. So I've had camera set up by news teams say, we want to have you come on and do a field report. And I say, okay. And I know no one's watching. Just nobody. Now, the thing for me is I've never signed a contract requiring me to spend large amounts of time dedicated to talking to a camera where I know no one's going to watch it. Because I know what the average viewership on these videos are. So I know that when I'm saying something, it has an impact. It matters. Maybe I'm wrong. It still has an impact. But Joe and Micah, can you imagine what they must be feeling like? Let me put it this way. Y'all are in your garage building a birdhouse that your neighbor or somebody is going to walk in and smash to bits, that everything you're doing will amount to nothing. It's pretty embarrassing for Joe and Micah to be on their show saying these things when nobody watches. No, I get it. They're on a lot of nursing homes. That's not a joke, and it's not meant to be disrespectful. There are a lot of people who watch. They're just 70 plus. Morning Joe co-hosts Joe Scarborough and Michael Brzezinski, 2 of Trump's fiercest critics, shocked the nation by discussing how they, visited Mar-a-Lago, blah, blah, blah. Disgusting, Jennifer Rubin reacted on Blue Sky. Rubin later ratcheted up the rhetoric, encouraging her followers to turn off Morning Joe to send a message. The market works great. She followed on MJ. If you don't appreciate the audience you have, betray that audience and lose their trust, you are going to lose lots of them. I have seen this movie. She's right. Completely. And they already did. Nobody's watching anymore because they make fake news. And we're tired of it. Rubin, also a columnist for the Washington Post, was likely alluding to the backlash the paper received from its liberal readers last month after the Post's billionaire owner, Bezos, halted its endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris. Neither Rubin nor MSNBC responded to Fox News Digital for a request for comment. My friends, at this time, Twitch is undergoing an adpocalypse, they call it, where tons of creators are saying they're losing lots of money. And they're blaming Hassan Piker. Political content on Twitch has scared off advertisers. They don't want to be involved anymore. And so now nobody's really making that much money. Some people are, but a lot of people have lost upwards of 90% of their revenue. Their businesses are destroyed. Yeah, that's probably Bezos. Jeff Bezos is probably like, we don't want to support this anymore. It's bad for business. The country doesn't want it. We need to stop this. For those asking why we would speak, we ask why not? Well, as Jon Stewart said, because you called him Hitler? There's one example. But for nearly 80 million Americans, election denials and public trials January 6th were not as important as the issues that moved them to send Donald Trump back to the White House with their vote. You see, here's what I think, my friends. I don't think that Joe Scarborough and Michael Brzezinski are developmentally disabled. I believe that they are intentionally lying to you. Let's try this. Election denialism. Joe Biden and Democrats and the Democratic Party have denied the election too. So what does that mean to anybody? Public trials. What does that mean? Of what? Seriously. Oh, you mean the fake ones where Trump is charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records in furtherance of a secondary crime for which there is no secondary crime? Oh, so who would care about that? January 6th. I love it. When they asked union workers, I think it was MSNBC, what do you think about January 6th? The guy's just like, what? January 6th, what do you think about it? He's like, what do you mean? The insurrection. I don't care. I didn't even know what they were talking about. These people are laughably insane. But you know what? It's only getting worse for them. Morning Joe meeting with Trump was driven by fears of retribution from incoming administration, sources say. Brian Stelter. It's remarkable because I do think a lot of these people really are just very stupid. And how do you deal with that? These people are so dumb, they don't know how to evaluate logic and understand reality. These are people who entertain 2 + 2 equaling 5. I'll put it this way. I often have arguments with people, and they just don't have the comprehensive capability to understand what is being said. Now, I certainly don't think I'm the smartest person in the room, but here is a big challenge. Within my mind, I have a framework of logic for an argument that I will make. I have long contemplated and deeply thought about things that I say. I don't just on the spot make something up and have no backing to these claims. I'll give you an example. When the left says, why do you care so much about like trans children? So I thought about it. I said to myself, why do people care so much? There's certainly some underlying logic that gives credence to the idea that this stuff is harmful in some way. It's not just an emotional reaction or disgust. No, there's real reasons behind it, and I'll give them to you. So the first is the permanent damage to a child's body when a child is not fully developed and can't make that decision could lead them to ultimately suffering from depression, anxiety, and other debilitating disorders. We actually see that manifest in detransitioners. More importantly, if we know that desistance rates of trans children is greater than chance, upwards of 90% in one study, and around 65 to 90 is the average they give, so it's pretty large and, 2 to 1 at bare minimum. But we know that suicidality can be 40% in trans people. Well, the math there is simple. If desistance is greater than chance, and there's a substantial increase in suicidality among trans people, then the best thing we can do is nothing and hope for desistance, as that will reduce suicidality in children. Now, we talk about child abuse and things like this. Yes, because it ultimately will make these people unhappy and less successful. It's largely detrimental to the expansion and creation of life. But more importantly, the human experience, psychological problems, depression, self-harm, all of these things are what we are trying to avoid. Hence, there is a logic underlying my morals. Why do liberals just say, why do you care so much? They are single order thinkers. And if you can only think within a few, either 1, 2, 3, or simple orders, then you cannot comprehend the argument presented for you. And thus, there's no argument to be had. I can't convince a dog that God exists because the dog doesn't understand English. It does insofar as I can say, sit, drop it, or heel. But if I try to explain deep, complex thought, the dog just goes, huh? So I look at it this way. Intelligence exists. And if we go to someone like Morning Joe or these Democrats and try to explain to them in deep logic, they can't understand. So what do? Well, I think truly this is what we are seeing in the divide between the left and the right. By all means, you can criticize many conservatives and people on the right as being not so bright, but it's like the bell curve meme of intelligence. The stupid guy who's drooling and his eyes come off the side of his head says God is real. The monk whose IQ is above average says God is real. And the average person crying says there's no evidence for God, you can't prove it, therefore there's no God. There's an interview Michael Knowles has going viral with the smartest man on the planet, they say. His IQ is 210. This guy points out IQ is not a total factor in intelligence, that he describes it as the aperture of understanding. Someone who's intelligent can be hyper-focused on one thing and not see beyond that. And if you truly want to have comprehensive capabilities, you need to be able to expand and think beyond just your focal point. Interesting, rudimentary, I would say. But this man simply says God is real. And he says you can observe it in nature. You can observe it, all of these things. And I can go into great detail as to why I believe in God. And the challenge is this. My friends, I don't believe in God willy-nilly simply because I grew up and someone told me, here is a book and it is God's word. In fact, I left the church and I'm not a Christian. But God is real, and I do believe a lot of Christian scripture does get close to understanding the nature of God. It's actually quite brilliant. Old theologians from long before realized these things well before I existed, and it's through standing on their shoulders I truly come to understand at least what I think I can understand. And that is to say, first and foremost, in all of these arguments, we could just be wrong. That's always an option. Science could be wrong. We think we know things, but we are looking through a keyhole in a 8,000 room mansion, and we think we understand the nature of existence. Fortunately, that's just not the case. We can only see a small part of the whole. We can never truly comprehend the whole, for we are but limited beings in this reality. However, my understanding of God comes through observation and science and math. Based on what we think we know, I believe that God is observable. Now, as I can go into great detail, my point is simply this. When I try to explain this to atheists, they can't comprehend it. I am not saying I am smarter than them or whatever. I'm pointing out that I have asked these questions over decades. I have read books and asked theologians and had great conversations in trying to understand the nature of reality to the best of my human mind, which is certainly not the smartest person on the planet, nor in the room most of the time. And so there are certain things that I've calculated and a math that I've gone through, and there are certain things that have not been disproven to me. If I were to argue to an atheist as to the structure of the universe as we think we know in science, admitting there are many things here that I believe to be incorrect, or I should say that may be falsifiable, may be wrong, but to the best of my ability, I believe to be true. What I will tell you is this: never has an atheist ever been able to challenge my presuppositions in a complete and logical way that would discredit the notion. Largely, the problem I find, and no disrespect to the intelligent atheists out there who would like to comment below and tell me why I'm wrong. What I find in almost every single circumstance, that's why I say almost every, when arguing with an atheist, they say things like, do you really think there's a guy floating around in the sky? And I say, no, I'm not a Christian. I don't believe that there is a man in the clouds. When you try to explain the basics of, say, like a tesseract, rudimentary in math to a certain degree, a fourth dimensional cube. Well, you can't call it a cube. It's a tesseract, but it's a fourth dimensional object. You have a square, you have a cube, you have a tesseract. We cannot comprehend what a tesseract would look like. We can create a 3D representation on a two-dimensional plane. It's crazy. Our brain can't perceive of what we mathematically believe to exist. I've watched tremendous documentaries in projecting multidimensional planes onto two-dimensional facsimiles to understand what they would look like and how we can perceive them mathematically. And you simply come down to understanding that, wow, while we can calculate the existence thereof, we can't perceive or even comprehend what it would look like beyond a two-dimensional representation. How incredible is this? Really? And the challenge I get to with so many people is, not every atheist, that's why I want to be clear, because I know some atheists will have these challenges. To me, what's fascinating is when they say, still, I don't think there's some guy who just controls everything. And I'm like, neither do I. But if you lack the capability to understand, an argument cannot be had. I suppose it is simple as this. I cannot give you my capability to comprehend the things that I see. And if you can't comprehend the things that I explain or see, then there's no point in having the discussion. Someone certainly smarter than I can help to enlighten me, because to a certain degree, if you are capable of comprehension, we'll test the boundaries. Perhaps there is a limit, and someone would try explaining. I got to be honest. I've read a lot of things in science, and I'm just like, I have to read this 10 times. I'm like, wow, wait. I have to figure out how this makes sense. Usually, it's much simpler than that. Most things I find to be easy enough to calculate. But let me wrap this all together, and I'll tell you why I bring this up. In a much simpler way, many of you believe in God. Many of you are Christian. Many of you may fall into the God is real, I don't need math. Some of you may fall into the I had to think about it, but I came to the conclusion that morals, logic, and God are true things that are observable. Many of you may be atheists and may be smart and say, I challenge you, prove it, whatever. The point I'm making here is, when you go to these Democrats and you say, and they don't read, they don't research, and they know nothing, and you say to them, do you understand how due process works? And they go, no. Well, at that point, how do you convince them to stop chasing after things that are burning everything down? Thus is the challenge we face every single day. You're not going to argue with them and convince them of something their brain can't comprehend. Bringing it all back to the beginning. These are people who argued 2 + 2 can equal 5. And when you try to explain that no, it can't, and they try and use these ridiculous arguments that actually 2.25 plus 2.25 equals 4.5, so we round up and that's 5, you say, you're not saying 2 + 2 is 5, you're saying 2.25. And it's just like, you can't do anything. Or what do? They go 1.25. And 1.25 is 2 rounded down. And if you add that to the same thing, now it's 4.5. Therefore, it rounds up to 5. Thus, it's 5. You're like, no. No, it's 4.5. We can whittle these things down to absolute to the best of our understanding. I suppose what I'm trying to say is people like Micah and Joe and these other people lead the ignorant who cannot comprehend like lambs to the slaughter. And only when they truly fear that they may get in trouble for their ill deeds do they panic and try and change their minds. Anyway, you know what? I need to get Jordan Peterson out here. We'll have a long conversation. It'll be fascinating. He can probably teach me a lot. Smash the like button, share the show with everyone you know, become a member over at timcast.com. More segments coming up soon. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all then.